I still remember the morning I packed my small overnight bag, modest, with just a few essentials, a carefully folded sari, and a small box of sweets I'd made myself. My hands trembled a little as I tied the knot around the tiffin box. It had been months since I last saw my son in person, and years since I helped him buy that house, the house he was now living in with his new wife, a place I had only seen in pictures. I was looking forward to finally stepping inside and being a part of their life again. I imagined laughter echoing through the rooms, perhaps us sitting down for tea while he showed me around proudly, pointing to this corner or that one, and saying, "Ma, remember when you said I should go for this neighborhood?" He used to be so affectionate, always the first to call, even if only for a minute, just to say he missed my cooking, or that he had a dream where I scolded him for not wearing a sweater. When he got married, I stepped back, as every mother does, to let him start his new life. I didn't want to impose. I simply waited for them to call me, for that invitation to come and stay for a few days. When it didn't, I told myself they were just adjusting. Young couples take time. But now, with the festival season approaching and no travel restrictions, I decided I would finally visit. I wasn't asking for anything, just a room for a few days, a warm corner in my son's home. The moment the phone rang that morning, I assumed it was to confirm when I would arrive. I had already ironed my best dupatta, but instead his voice came over the line, cold, unusually formal. "Ma," he said, "I've spoken to Ria about your visit. We think it's not the right time." I was confused. "And not the right time, Beta. I've already packed." There was a pause. "The thing is, the house is small. Ria's family is coming too. There's no room for everyone." My breath caught in my chest. I blinked, waiting for him to add a solution or compromise, but none came. I managed to whisper, "You mean, I can't come." "It's not personal, Ma," he said quickly. "You know how things are. The house is full. We'll meet soon, I promise." And with that, the line went dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, the soft whistle of the pressure cooker in the kitchen now sounding painfully loud. My hands slowly fell to my sides, still holding onto the box of sweets, still believing this was all a misunderstanding. A few hours later, as I sat staring at the half-packed bag on my bed, my phone buzzed again, a message this time. It was from Ria. "Auntie, we really hope you understand. We just have a lot going on. Maybe next month will be better. Hope you're not hurt." "Hope I'm not hurt," I whispered aloud. The words felt like thorns. The polite tone made it worse, as if I was being unreasonable to feel anything at all. I had sacrificed everything for that boy. Every bangle sold for his tuition. Every festival celebrated alone so he could study abroad or focus on work. I had gone to sleep hungry some nights so he wouldn't have to miss his rent. And now, when I asked only for a small place in his new life, I was too much. I didn't reply. What was there to say? That I wasn't hurt? That I understood I couldn't lie like that? The betrayal felt raw and immediate, and no matter how I turned it around in my mind, I couldn't make it make sense. As the day went on, I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned the house, watered the plants, cooked dal even though I had no appetite. I lit a diya that evening, more out of habit than devotion, and sat near the window where my husband used to sit, imagining how he might have responded. He would have stormed over there. He always said, "No one gets to disrespect your mother." But he wasn't here anymore. It was just me now, and yet I wasn't entirely alone. Later that evening, as I sat in the same chair, I heard the bell ring. It was my old friend Shanti. She didn't ask too many questions, just saw the uneaten dinner, the droop in my shoulders, and hugged me tightly. "I heard," she said quietly. "Ramesh told me." I didn't say much. Just shook my head. I raised him better. I said softly. Shanti looked at me, her eyes fierce. "Then don't let this be your ending." Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I lay in bed thinking of all the things I had done for him. Not for reward, but out of love. But maybe it was time I did something for myself. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but for dignity, for peace. I didn't sleep much. But when I finally rose, there was a quiet fire inside me that hadn't been there before. My son might not have room for me in his house, but maybe, just maybe, it was time I found my own. The next morning, I awoke feeling older than I had in years. My joints ached not from age, but from emotional exhaustion. I shuffled into the kitchen and made myself tea, the steam rising like memories I didn't ask for. I sat quietly at the table, the same one where I had once helped my son with his homework, where we had eaten meals together, just the two of us, a team against the world after his father passed. I had taken pride in every sacrifice, selling my gold bangles for his school fees, worth it, skipping new clothes for Diwali so he could have a computer, no hesitation. I had told myself then that it would all come back in the form of respect and care, that he'd look after me one day the way I looked after him. I had placed my hopes not in fate or fortune, but in the boy I raised with both hands and heart, and yet here I was, unwelcome, cast aside like an inconvenience. I stared at the quiet corners of my house and couldn't ignore how it suddenly felt smaller. The walls, once covered with his drawings and certificates, now seemed to echo with a loneliness I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just his rejection that stung, it was the ease with which he had delivered it, no hesitation, no guilt, just a clean, quiet no, as if I were a stranger trying to check into a hotel with no reservation. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe he was under pressure, or perhaps Ria had persuaded him somehow. But when I opened my phone and saw a new message from her, that illusion shattered. The message was polite, too polite, artificially sweet, like tea with too much sugar and no soul. Auntie, I really do hope you don't take this personally. It's just that we have limited space, and we promised my parents that they'd stay with us this week. It's really nothing against you. Please understand. I stared at those words for what felt like an hour. Nothing against you. They could dress it up however they wanted, but it was rejection. A decision made behind closed doors, without my voice, without my feelings considered. I wasn't just left out. I was deliberately excluded. And the worst part was that they thought I would accept it, that I would smile, nod, and quietly disappear, because that's what good mothers do. Tears welled in my eyes, uninvited and stubborn. I wiped them away quickly, ashamed of my own hurt. But the ache in my chest refused to leave. It pulsed with every reminder of what I had given up for them. My wedding necklace, gone to help with their down payment. My husband's last gold watch, sold for tuition fees. A lifetime of savings, spent not on myself, but on the boy who now found me inconvenient. I stood up, paced the room, then sat down again. Grief circled me like a vulture, feeding off my helplessness. I felt betrayed, not by an outsider, but by the child I had given everything to. Just then, the bell rang again. This time, it was Shanty with 2 cups of tea, and that no-nonsense look she wore like armor. She took one look at me and said, "He didn't apologize, did he?" I shook my head, unable to speak. She sighed and placed a gentle hand on mine, then stopped waiting for one. "You've spent your life giving. Maybe it's time to take something back." "What do I take back?" I asked quietly. "My son, my sacrifices, my dignity." She gave me a long, hard look. "No," she said, "you take back your power, your purpose. You stop waiting for them to treat you better and start treating yourself the way you deserve." Her words echoed in my ears long after she left. They felt heavy, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. I had never done anything for myself, not really. Every decision had been shaped around my son, his dreams, his needs, his future. But what about mine? What did I want now that the illusion of family comfort had crumbled? That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and took out an old notebook, one where I had once scribbled baked recipes and budgeting plans. I flipped through pages and found a list I had written years ago. Things I'll do one day: travel, learn a new language, own something that's mine. I laughed bitterly at how naive it sounded, but somewhere in that laugh was a spark. Faint but there, I closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I asked myself not what he needed, but what I needed, and the answer came quietly. I needed to feel seen again. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's burden, but as a woman who still had value, who still had strength. I didn't have much savings left, but I had something. A few fixed deposits, a small inheritance from my brother's side that I had tucked away for emergencies. Was this not an emergency of the soul? I didn't sleep that night either. But this time it wasn't sadness that kept me up. It was planning, ideas, resolve. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for someone else to open a door. I was going to build my own. The morning after my resolve began to take root, I stood by the mirror brushing my hair, but something had shifted. I wasn't looking at a grieving mother anymore. I was looking at a woman who was beginning to reclaim something she hadn't touched in years, her identity. The idea of doing something for myself still felt foreign, like I was breaking an unspoken rule, but I had broken enough for others. It was time. With my modest savings and that small inheritance tucked away in a nearly forgotten bank account, I began making calls. My hands trembled as I dialed the number of a local real estate agent I remembered from years ago. Mr. Arif. He had helped a friend of mine once and came highly recommended. I'm not looking for anything extravagant, I told him. Just somewhere that's mine, just a roof I can call my own. Within 2 days, I was seated in his office, an aging fan turning lazily above us and sunlight streaming in through worn curtains. He listened patiently as I explained my situation, never interrupting. There was kindness in his eyes, not pity, which comforted me. We can start small, he said, something clean and quiet, a nice apartment perhaps in a calm part of town. It sounded practical, safe, appropriate. And yet the moment I stepped into the first property, a compact 2-room apartment with white walls and stiff lighting, I felt nothing, no connection, no emotion, just silence. The agent began explaining the price, the view, the security system, but his voice faded into the background. I looked around the sterile space and asked myself, is this the reward? Is this where all those sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the love end? It felt like settling, and after everything I had endured, I didn't want to settle anymore. That night, I sat alone with my cup of chai, the city lights twinkling in the distance through my window. I could have said yes to the apartment. It would have been easier. I could have moved in quietly, aged gracefully in a quiet corner of the city, watching TV and feeding birds. But every time I tried to imagine that future, it felt hollow. I wasn't ready to shrink into the shadows, not yet. And then life, fickle and unpredictable, decided to intervene. A few evenings later, I attended a small community fundraiser. Shanti had dragged me there, insisting I needed to leave the house and breathe. I didn't feel like socializing, but I went anyway, mostly for her sake. The hall was modest, filled with familiar aunties, warm food, and cheerful background music. I was nursing a cup of lemon water in the corner when I saw a familiar face. Mrs. Farzana, an old acquaintance from my husband's side. She had always been charming, a little grand in her gestures but genuine in her words. We hadn't spoken in years, but she came straight to me with arms wide open. "You look radiant," she said kindly, and even though I knew it wasn't entirely true, I smiled. She was now living in a stunning villa across the city, recently widowed, no children, but busy with charities and property investments. We chatted briefly about the past, old memories, mutual friends. Then she leaned in, almost conspiratorially. "You know," she said, "if you're ever thinking of buying something, don't limit yourself. Don't think small. You've earned more than that." Her words sat with me all evening. They weren't said with arrogance or pressure, just belief. Belief in what a woman like me could still do. And I realized then that what I needed wasn't just a roof over my head. I needed a new beginning. Not just a shelter, but a statement, a symbol that I was not broken, not discarded, that I still had dreams and, more importantly, the courage to chase them. The next day I called Mr. Arif again. "I want to see plots," I told him. "Land, something with potential." He hesitated for a moment, surprised. "Are you sure, madame? A full build will take time, and it's more involved." "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm sure." We visited 3 locations that week. The first was too cramped, the second felt too far, but the third, was magic. It was a slightly elevated plot near the edge of a hill, with a panoramic view of the city skyline on one side and thick trees on the other. It was quiet, breezy, and full of light. I stood there for a long time, imagining the garden, the veranda, a study by the window, not for show, not for revenge, but for me. For once, I was going to build something that reflected me. Of course, the finances were tight. I had enough to buy the land, but building a house would stretch me. Still, the numbers didn't scare me. I had stretched for others all my life. Stretching for myself felt long overdue. I finalized the paperwork within a week. The builder was young but sincere. I showed him clippings I had saved over the years, rough sketches from when I used to dream aloud with my husband. He smiled and said, "We'll make it real, Auntie, just like you imagined." Around that time, my son called again. I hadn't heard from him since that cold refusal, and the call felt more transactional than emotional. "Ma," he said, "we're looking to invest in something new. Maybe a small property. Can you help us with some funds, just for a few months?" I closed my eyes. The old me would have found a way, sold something, borrowed if needed. But not this time, not now. "I'm sorry, Beta," I said quietly. "I've invested everything I had." There was silence on the line. I could feel his confusion, maybe even irritation, but I stayed calm. "I hope it works out for you," I added, and ended the call gently. I didn't tell him what I had invested in. I didn't tell him about the land or the view or the foundation that was going to be laid next week. Let him wonder. Let him live in the belief that his mother was still quietly waiting in that small house, waiting for an apology that might never come. Because soon he would see something far more powerful than words. He would see that his rejection didn't break me. It built something beautiful instead. The morning the construction began, I stood at the edge of the plot, wearing an old shawl and holding a small silver dia in my hand. The soil was uneven, the air cool, and the sky painted in pale dawn. As I lit the dia and placed it gently into the earth, I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer, not for wealth, not for status, but for strength, for completion, for peace. For years I had been told to stay within the lines, to be quiet, selfless, invisible, but now I was going to draw my own boundaries, my own walls, my own windows. This home would rise from the very roots of my pain and rejection, but it would be built with dignity, not bitterness. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in every detail of the project. The architect was kind and surprisingly patient with my endless questions. We sat together over cups of chai, sketching floor plans and elevations on butter paper, erasing, redoing, dreaming. "You want a reading room?" he had asked, surprised. "Yes," I replied, "with windows that open to the east. I like the morning light." He smiled and made a note. I asked for a garden space, not large, just enough to grow tulsi, jasmine, and perhaps a lemon tree. A small kitchen, open and breezy, 2 guest rooms, 1 main bedroom, a terrace with railings strong enough for me to lean on without worry. Every inch of the house was a reflection of thought, something I hadn't applied to my own life in years. For once, I wasn't building for anyone else. Not a husband, not a son, not society. This was mine. Each visit to the site brought fresh energy. The workers began recognizing me, greeting me with smiles and updates. I brought them tea sometimes or samosas in the afternoon. I learned names, their children's names, their struggles. We spoke not like strangers, but like people who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. One day, as I stood watching the bricklayers work, one of the younger men said to me, "Auntie, you're the only one who comes here smiling. Most owners just shout or ignore us." I smiled in return and said, "Maybe that's because I know what it means to be overlooked too." Meanwhile, life outside the construction site carried on as usual. I kept to myself. Shanti was the only one who knew about the mansion, and she promised to keep it a secret. "Let it be your reveal," she said. "You deserve that moment." I agreed. As the walls began rising from the soil, so did my confidence. I started dressing better, walking straighter, not for others, but because I wanted to. I cooked meals I hadn't made in years, played old songs on the radio, started journaling again in the evenings. I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under the title of mother. One day, as I was finalizing the wood finish for the living room cabinets, my phone rang again. It was my son, His voice was softer than before, but the undercurrent of assumption still lingered. "Ma," he began, "I just wanted to check in. It's been a while. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" The questions were scripted, his tone guarded. I smiled to myself and replied, "I'm quite all right, Beta. In fact, I'm a little busy these days." He was taken aback. "Busy with what?" I chuckled softly. "Just some home improvements." I kept it vague. He didn't press further. He must have assumed I was repainting my kitchen or fixing the plumbing. If only he knew. A few days later he called again, this time with a request. "There's a small issue," he began carefully. "We're going through some tight months financially. Ria's business didn't take off as planned, and I'm managing everything solo. If you could just help us with a short-term loan, even a few lakhs, it would help us breathe easier." I listened quietly, not with resentment but with clarity. I remembered the old me, the mother who would have instantly sold her bangles, borrowed from neighbors, or quietly gone hungry for weeks just to ease his life. But she wasn't on the phone anymore. "I'm sorry," I said gently, "but I've invested everything I had." He was quiet for a moment, not knowing how to respond. Invested in what? I paused myself. I said simply, "I've started something for me." He didn't know what that meant, and I didn't explain. It wasn't the time. I could hear confusion in his silence, the faint crack in his pride. "I hope you understand," I added. "This is the first time I'm choosing me." We ended the call soon after. No fight. No shouting, just space. Space he once denied me and space I was now reclaiming. Weeks passed and the mansion began to take shape. The frame turned into form. Walls became rooms. Cement transformed into a dream. Every piece of furniture was hand-picked. Every curtain, color, and corner held intention. I chose marble flooring, not out of vanity, but because it reminded me of my grandmother's home. I asked for large windows, so that light could always find its way in. I even created a small prayer room with brass lamps and shelves for incense. I wasn't religious in the traditional sense, but I wanted a place for reflection, for stillness. One afternoon, as I was checking the final fixtures in the kitchen, I heard a car pull up outside. I peeked through the front gate and froze for a moment. It was him, my son and Ria. I hadn't told them to visit. Had someone let it slip, or had curiosity finally pulled them in? They got out of the car slowly, eyes scanning the structure. They didn't recognize it at first. The paint hadn't been finished, and there were still construction materials lying around. But then he saw me, standing on the steps in a crisp cotton sari, clipboard in hand. "Ma," he said, visibly stunned, "is this your house?" I smiled politely, walking down to meet them at the gate. "Yes," I replied, still under work but nearly done. Ria was the first to speak. "You're building this alone?" I nodded. I had help, but the dream, the planet's all mine. They looked around, unsure what to say. The garden area had started to bloom with fresh jasmine. The study windows were in place. The gate was solid steel. It wasn't just a house, it was a message. I didn't invite them in yet. I simply smiled and said, "There's a small housewarming planned next month. You're welcome to attend, of course." The subtle emphasis was intentional. "You're welcome," something I hadn't been. And as they stood there in silence, caught between awe and discomfort, I turned and walked back into the site, into the home I had built not to impress them, but to liberate myself. As the weeks unfolded and my mansion rose toward completion, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in a very long time, a sense of ownership over my own destiny. The scaffolding was now removed, revealing large French windows on both floors. The tiling was nearly complete. Chandeliers I had chosen personally hung in their places like sparkling declarations of independence. The front garden, though still raw, had begun to blossom, marigolds and roses breaking through the once dry soil. Each detail carried a memory, a vision, a quiet triumph. But perhaps the most satisfying part wasn't the house itself. It was how much of myself I was rediscovering in its walls. Every brushstroke and nail was a quiet refusal to be erased. The workers had started calling the mansion Amavilla on site, not because I asked them to, but because the name seemed to fit. I had become part of their routine, part of their story. I often brought them snacks, sat with them during tea breaks, and shared laughs about the slow plumber or the missing cement bags. In return, they respected me, not as a client, but as a leader. It reminded me of my younger years, back when I managed so much with so little, always keeping my family afloat. But this time there was no family leaning on me. I was doing this for me, and yet in many ways I had never felt more connected to others. It was during one of these quiet days that my son and his wife showed up again. They weren't invited this time either, and I knew immediately from the look on Ria's face that this visit wasn't about curiosity, it was about suspicion. Perhaps someone had mentioned the land was now worth more, or that the home I was building wasn't just comfortable but luxurious. Whatever the reason, they walked up the freshly tiled path like guests in a place they hadn't expected to find this grand. My son gave a stiff nod. "Ma, we thought we'd stop by since we were in the area." Ria stood beside him, lips tight, eyes scanning everything, from the imported floor tiles to the antique door frame I'd chosen from a market in Rajasthan. I didn't react. I simply gestured toward the front steps. "You're welcome to look around, but the work isn't finished yet." My voice was calm, cool, not impolite, but certainly not warm. I led them inside without fanfare. The marble floors gleamed. Natural light poured through the windows, illuminating every corner. They said little, though I noticed Ria eyeing the kitchen appliances, the curved staircase, and the hand-carved detailing on the banister. At one point, my son turned to me and said, "Ma, this place is bigger than we expected." I nodded slowly, letting silence do the rest. I could feel the unspoken questions hanging between us. How did you afford this? Who helped you? Why didn't you tell us? But I offered no explanations. I didn't owe them any. The woman who once emptied her savings for them had been met with silence when she needed only one thing, a room. They didn't ask about my well-being. They didn't express regret. And I didn't ask for anything now either. I simply let them look. As they were preparing to leave, I walked them to the entrance and said casually, "There's a little housewarming next week. I've invited a few friends. If you'd like to come, you're welcome." I could see the discomfort on Ria's face, perhaps at being offered a seat at a table they never expected me to own. They nodded, unsure, and left with forced smiles. The gate clicked shut behind them like a punctuation mark. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the final touches. I met with the caterer, selected the flower arrangements, and confirmed guest invites. Shanti helped me with the list. My builder surprised me by adding a little nameplate outside the door, "Home of Meena Devi." I had never seen my full name carved like that before. It wasn't grand, but it felt permanent, like a stamp of identity no one could erase. On the eve of the housewarming, I stood alone in the main hall, walking from room to room, soaking in the beauty. This home wasn't just a structure, it was a story, arising from the ashes, a quiet, magnificent defiance. Then, as if scripted by fate, I received a call. It was my son again, this time with more edge in his voice. "Ma, we're facing some issues," he began awkwardly. "Business isn't great, and our landlord's increasing the rent. It's getting hard." He paused as if waiting for me to fill the silence with an offer, a solution, a rescue. We were thinking," he continued, "maybe we could stay with you for a while, just until we figure things out." My heart didn't break, it didn't even ache. It simply paused, then beat stronger. I took a deep breath and replied gently, "You said there wasn't room for me. I've made peace with that." He fumbled with words. That was Ria, and I didn't mean. I cut him off, not harshly but firmly. "This home is for those who see me, respect me. If you'd like to attend the gathering, come as a guest, not as a dependent." There was a long silence, then a defeated okay. I hung up, not out of cruelty, but clarity. This moment wasn't revenge, it was redemption. The woman they turned away was no longer standing in the rain with a suitcase. She was standing inside something beautiful she had built with her own hands, her own will. When the housewarming day arrived, friends began arriving in bright saris and kurtas, carrying gifts and smiles. Laughter echoed through the halls. The aroma of biryani and sweets filled the rooms, and then, near noon, the gate creaked open again. My son and Rhea stepped inside, awkward, overdressed, carrying a bouquet far too expensive to feel genuine. I welcomed them politely, no drama, no scolding, just a firm, steady grace. As they looked around, I could see the disbelief in their eyes. My son finally turned to me and whispered, "I had no idea you could do this, Ma." I smiled softly, neither did I. But I had no choice but to learn. The days following the housewarming were quieter, but not empty. They were filled with a new rhythm, one of soft mornings, jasmine blooming outside my window, the rustling of the newspaper, and occasional phone calls from friends who had attended the event, still gushing over the food, the grandeur, the elegance. Some called it a palace, others called it a miracle, but to me it was simply home, and in that home I found a kind of peace I never thought I'd experience, the kind of peace that only comes when you stop begging for space in someone else's life and start claiming your own. I no longer needed approval. I no longer needed acknowledgement from the very people who had once overlooked me. I had never been a prideful woman, but I was finally beginning to understand the difference between pride and dignity. What I had now wasn't arrogance, it was self-respect, and I was going to protect it like I once protected my son's future. Every morning I walked through my garden, trimmed the tulsi with my own hands, read a few pages in the study, and spent my evenings sipping chai on the balcony as the city shimmered below. These simple joys weren't gifts from others. They were built from the strength I never knew I had. A week later, I hosted a small gathering, not like the housewarming, but a quiet celebration with people who mattered. Shanti, of course, brought her infectious laughter and her famous carrot halwa. Mrs. Farzana, who had once planted the seed of ambition in me at the fundraiser, arrived in a bright pink sal, wore suit and spent half the evening praising the layout of my kitchen. A couple of retired teachers from my old neighborhood showed up with home, baked bread and marigold garlands. The house felt warm, not just from the lights or the food, but from the love, the real kind, the earned kind. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, one of the elder aunties came up to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mina," she said, "this house isn't just beautiful. It has soul. It has your courage in every corner." Her words stayed with me long after the door closed behind her. I walked into the main hallway, dimly lit now, and sat on the step just before the staircase. I looked around at the walls, the floors, the air that felt so unmistakably mine. For the first time in decades, I wasn't anyone's obligation. I wasn't just a mother or a widow or a guest in someone else's home. I was Mina Divi, and that was enough. But the world has a way of testing your peace. It doesn't like when a woman, especially an aging one, claims her worth so completely. That test came 2 days later when my phone rang again. My son's name flashed across the screen and I hesitated before answering. There was no emotion in my heart, just curiosity. "Ma," he said, sounding out of breath, anxious, "can we talk?" I could hear noise in the background, people, perhaps a cafe, maybe traffic. "Of course," I said calmly, "what's going on?" He hesitated, then blurted out, "Ma, things are really bad. Ria's online business is under investigation. Some payments got frozen. My job's also on shaky ground. We're struggling." He paused, as if the next part was difficult to say. "We're 3 months behind on rent. Ria's parents can't help either. We may have to move out soon, and the baby's on the way." A strange mix of emotions surged through me. Baby. He hadn't even told me they were expecting. I didn't react immediately. I let his words hang in the air, as if weighing their own weight. "So what are you saying, Beta?" I asked. He exhaled shakily. "We were wondering if we could maybe stay with you, just for a few months, until things settle. I know it's asking a lot, but we have nowhere else to go." I stood silently by the window, watching the orange sun dip below the city skyline. The very city where I had once begged for a room in his house, where he had said no without hesitation. And now life had spun the wheel, bringing him to my doorstep, broken and humbled. "I understand you're going through a hard time," I said gently, my voice unwavering. "And I truly hope you find stability soon." He was silent. He hadn't expected that answer. "But Ma, we have nowhere else, I know," I interrupted softly. But this home was built for peace, for healing. I cannot let it become a space of tension again. You see, Beta, when I needed you, I wasn't asking for luxury. Just a corner, a bed, a bit of warmth. But I was told there was no room. Now, I finally have a roof of my own. I can't offer it to someone who once saw me as disposable. His voice cracked. Ma, please, we made a mistake. Rhea regrets what she said. I was caught in the middle. I sighed. We all make mistakes, son, but some mistakes have costs. You taught me that when you shut the door on me. Now I'm just following the lesson you gave me. There was a long silence, and then, quietly, I didn't know you were capable of this. I smiled, tears finally touching my lashes. Not out of pain but release, neither did I, until I had to be. As I ended the call, I didn't feel victorious, I didn't feel cruel, I felt whole. I hadn't rejected my son out of vengeance. I had simply set a boundary, something I never did before. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and looked out the window where the moon was rising. It was full, bright, unashamed. Just like I had become. The morning I moved into the finished mansion was unlike any other morning I had ever experienced. The usual rhythm of my life, waking in a familiar bed, boiling the same tea leaves, opening the same creaky window, had now been replaced with something entirely new. I opened my eyes and stared at the high, white ceiling above me, the soft golden light of dawn filtering in through sheer curtains that danced in the gentle breeze. The house wasn't just ready, it was radiant. The paint had dried, the chandeliers sparkled, and the scent of fresh wood and flowers filled every room like a whisper of hope. This wasn't a house anymore. It was my rebirth, my reclamation. The woman who once stood in her son's driveway, unwelcome and unwanted, was now the queen of her own domain. I moved from room to room that day as if I were revisiting fragments of my own soul. The study with the large window that faced east was my favorite spot. I had placed a soft beige armchair by the window, stacked with 3 of my old favorite novels and a new fountain pen I had gifted myself. The view outside revealed a wide expanse of green fields stretching toward the horizon, the sky above gently smeared with lavender hues. I sat there for a moment, silent, breathing in the reality that this peace, this space, was something I had built, not been granted, and that made it all the more precious. Downstairs, the marble, floored hallway gleamed beneath the soft lighting fixtures. The prayer room stood quiet but radiant, housing a small brass dia stand and an old wooden mandir that had once belonged to my grandmother. My kitchen, my pride, was open and airy, the cabinets finished in soft walnut, and the countertops a smooth ivory marble. The garden outside had finally taken shape, with neat rows of marigolds, hibiscus, and tulsi. I had even added a small stone bench beneath a mango tree that stood like a silent guardian near the boundary wall. I didn't throw a grand party. There were no camera crews or magazine features. But I did host a simple dinner with the people who had truly been part of my journey. Shanti, of course, brought her infectious energy and a basket of sweets. The architect, the builder, and even 2 of the workers I had grown close to during the project were there. We dined beneath soft fairy lights strung along the veranda, laughter echoing under the stars. And though we celebrated quietly, I could feel the triumph in the air. I wasn't just the host of a dinner, I was the author of a new chapter. That night, once everyone had left and the lights dimmed, I sat down to write a letter, a speech of sorts. It wasn't for a stage or a microphone. It was for one specific audience. I intended to read it soon, at the perfect moment. I poured my heart onto the pages, not with anger or blame, but with truth. I wrote about the sacrifices I had made without resentment, the pain I had endured in silence, and the strength I found when no one else stood beside me. I wrote about the gift of being rejected. It had been cruel, yes, but it had awakened something fierce inside me. And then I wrote the words that mattered most. I may have lost your respect for a while, but I found my own. 2 days later, I sent an invitation card to my son, a simple envelope, white with gold trim. Inside it read, "Dear Rahul, I invite you to visit my new home. No expectations, no discussions, just one request. Come with your eyes open. Ma, I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't wait for one." I went about my routine as usual, caring for my garden, reading on the balcony, sipping tea in the mornings. But deep inside, I sensed that he would come, not because he missed me, not yet, but because curiosity is a powerful thing. And pride, when threatened, often seeks to measure what it once ignored. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. I had been in the backyard, tending to the jasmine, when I heard the soft crunch of tires on the gravel. I wiped my hands with a towel and walked toward the front, heart steady. There he stood, Rahul in a gray shirt and slacks, trying to look casual but visibly tense. Beside him, Ria clutched her handbag like a shield. They both looked around slowly, taking in the white pillars, the glass-paneled door, the carved balcony rails, and the long driveway leading to a side garden. Their expressions flickered between disbelief and confusion. I stood silently on the porch watching. "Ma," he finally said, as if unsure of the word. "This is your house." "Yes," I replied softly. "Welcome." I didn't rush to hug them. I didn't ask them to sit or eat. I simply turned and walked inside, expecting them to follow. They did, slowly, their shoes echoing on the marble. As they walked through the living room, their eyes darted from the ceiling moldings to the antique mirror, to the sleek furniture. "How," Ria finally whispered, "how did you do all this?" I didn't answer. I led them to the dining room, where 3 glasses of lemonade sat on the table. I gestured for them to sit. Then I reached into the drawer, pulled out the letter I had written, and placed it in front of them. "I want you to read this," I said. "Before you say anything, just read." They exchanged glances, then Rahul picked up the letter. I watched as his eyes moved across the page, his fingers tightening with each line. Ria leaned closer, reading along. There were no raised voices, no arguments, just the weight of truth settling in. When he reached the final sentence, I found my own respect. He set the letter down slowly. His face was pale. Ria's eyes had welled up. "Ma," he said hoarsely, "I didn't know you. I never imagined you could." "Exactly." I interrupted gently. "You never imagined, because you never looked." I stood then, straight and strong. "I needed a room, that's all, a space to rest, to breathe, to feel safe. You and your wife couldn't spare that, and now that I have all of this," I gestured around us. "You wonder how I managed. I managed because you left me no choice." I pulled a second envelope from the drawer. "And this," I said, placing it in front of him, "is a legal document." His brows furrowed. "What kind of document?" he asked. "It outlines the division of my estate." I said evenly, "You will not inherit this house. You will not inherit my remaining investments, not unless you earn back what you so casually discarded. Your regard, your empathy, your ability to see me as more than a wallet or a burden." The silence that followed was deafening. He stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. Ria sat frozen, and I, for once in my life, felt no guilt in speaking my truth. The moment my son picked up the envelope containing the legal document, the air between us turned dense, almost suffocating. His fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the papers, scanning the contents as if hoping he had misunderstood me. Ria leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting back and forth across the lines of legal text. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It pulsed with disbelief, anxiety, and something else they weren't used to confronting. Power, my power. Rahul finally looked up, his voice caught between disbelief and desperation. "Ma, what is this? You're disinheriting me." He couldn't even say the word without choking on it. I remained seated, my posture steady, gaze fixed on him. "No," I said calmly, "I'm not disinheriting you. I'm simply formalizing something you made clear a long time ago. You don't want to live with me, include me, or support me. That's your choice. And now, this," I tapped the document, "is mine." "But Ma," Ria interjected, her tone indignant now, "you're our family. Families forgive. They don't punish like this." I turned to her slowly, maintaining my composure. "Forgiveness isn't the issue, Ria. I forgave you long ago. I forgave the message you sent me, the cold silence that followed, and the way you made me feel like a stranger in my son's life. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean handing over my life's work to those who never once stood by me." Rahul looked as though he might protest again, but the weight of the letter, both the emotional one and the legal one, had knocked the wind out of him. "I didn't know," he mumbled. I didn't know how much you'd sacrificed. I didn't know you were hurting. And that," I said, finally letting emotion enter my voice, "is the most painful part. You didn't know because you didn't care to ask. You didn't see me because you didn't bother to look. All my life, I've given without question. I sold my jewelry so you could study abroad. I used my savings to help with down payment for your house, and when I finally needed one room, just one corner to breathe, that became an inconvenience." He looked down, guilt now etched into every line of his face. I was under pressure. He whispered, "Rhea, the baby, her parents, it was complicated." "Life is always complicated, Rahul," I said softly but firmly. "But character is revealed in those complications. When it was inconvenient for you to offer kindness, you chose comfort. When it was uncomfortable to stand by your mother, you chose silence." Rhea, now clearly emotional, sat back, her expression conflicted. Her voice softened. "I'm sorry, Auntie. I didn't realize how cruel I was. I just thought it was temporary, and we didn't have space, and I didn't think it would matter so much." "It mattered," I said, standing up slowly. "Because what you two taught me that day was that my value in your life was conditional. Conditional on my usefulness, my silence, my sacrifice, but no more. I built this house with the last of what I had, not just money but spirit, and I will not let it be a place where I feel invisible again." Rahul opened his mouth, then closed it. The realization was dawning now, not just that I had built something magnificent without them, but that I had rebuilt myself in the process. And now, I wasn't asking for respect, I was commanding it. "Then what happens now?" he asked eventually, a trace of his old self still lingering in the question. "Are you saying we're cut off?" I walked toward the window, where sunlight was streaming through the lace curtains, falling gently on the tiled floor. "I'm saying," I began slowly, "that I will always be your mother, but from this day forward I am no longer your safety net. If you want to be part of my life, you will have to earn your way back with honesty, with effort, and with respect. Not through apologies whispered under pressure, but through consistent actions that show me you truly understand what you threw away." He nodded slowly, absorbing every word like someone waking from a long, self-induced sleep. "What about the baby?" he said finally. "Will you want to be a part of their life?" Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain, but from the deep sorrow of how much had been lost. "Yes," I whispered. "Of course, but only if you teach them better than what you showed me. I will not watch another generation treat love like an obligation. If you want me in their life, you will treat me with the dignity I've earned." Rhea stood up then, placing a hand on my arm. "I'm sorry, truly," she said, voice shaking. "You deserved better. We both know that now." I didn't answer with words. I simply nodded, placing my hand over hers briefly. A gesture of closure, not absolution. After a few moments they left, not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly, like people who had walked into a temple expecting a favor and received a sermon instead. As their car drove away down the long path lined with garden lights, I walked back inside and closed the heavy wooden door behind me. I leaned against it for a moment, then walked to the living room, where the letter still lay on the table, beside the document. I picked up the letter and folded it neatly, placing it in my journal. The document went back in the drawer. Both had done their job. The house was silent again, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with something stronger than sound: resolution. I knew then that whatever happened next, I would not bend again. Not because I had hardened, but because I had learned the value of standing tall. Later that evening, as I sat in the garden with a steaming cup of tea, my phone buzzed. A message from Rahul. "Thank you, Ma, for everything. You were right. I have a lot to fix. I hope I can start slowly." I read the message twice, then locked the screen. For now, that was enough. Let him prove it with actions. Let him rebuild his place in my heart the way I rebuilt my home, brick by honest brick. I leaned back, let the wind kiss my face, and smiled, not because I had won, but because I had finally chosen me. The days following my son's visit were strange, not painful, but filled with a new kind of silence, not the silence of rejection or loneliness, but of realization settling in on all sides. I no longer felt hollow or haunted by his refusal from before. I had spoken my truth, drawn my line, and for once, held it firmly. Yet I knew something was unraveling in Rahul's world, and this time it wasn't mine to fix. It wasn't my duty to rush in and save them, not after what had transpired. Still, a part of me wondered what conversations were happening in their home now. After everything they had seen and heard within the walls of the mansion, they never imagined I could build. Ria's apology, although late, had not been entirely hollow. I had seen a flicker of guilt and shame in her eyes, something deeper than mere embarrassment. And Rahul, my son, he had looked like a boy who had stumbled across the wreckage of his own doing, unsure of how to piece things back together. But the moment had passed, and what remained now was the weight of choices, theirs and mine. 3 days after their visit, I received a call not from Rahul, but from his father-in-law, a curt man, always brimming with entitlement, who once looked down on me as the retired widow with no influence. He had never cared to remember my name properly. Now he was calling me Meena Jai. He began putting on a thick layer of fake politeness. I heard Rahul visited you recently. We've been a little concerned about his situation. You know, business is tough, and with the baby coming, things are a bit delicate. I let him talk. And talk until he got to his point. We're just wondering if you could lend a helping hand again. Just something temporary. Maybe you can offer to let them move in for a while, or help them out financially for a few months until things normalize. You've always been generous. I almost laughed. Generous, yes, blindly generous. Never again. I replied, calm but measured. It's interesting. I said how quickly people remember generosity when they need it, and forget it when they're comfortable. I gave Rahul everything I could, his education, his house, his dreams. But the one time I asked for something small, I was told there wasn't space. Now that I have more than space, the same people want in. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. I understand, but don't you think it's time to move past all that? Families argue, but in the end, blood is blood. No, I replied firmly. In the end, respect is respect, and that's what was missing. Maybe if you had taught your daughter that earlier, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. He was stunned. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a clipped very well, and the call ended. I placed the phone down and stood there, staring out the large window overlooking my garden. The breeze rustled the tulsi leaves, and the soft sunlight painted the white marble floors in a gentle golden hue. I felt peaceful. Later that week, I was hosting a small reading group in the study. 3 women from the neighborhood had joined me, 2 retired teachers and a young writer who admired the journey I had taken. We sipped tea, discussed a novel about second chances and self-worth, and laughed at the irony of fiction, often resembling real life more than we'd like to admit. Just as our session ended, my daughter, Anaya, arrived. She lived abroad and had only just heard about the housewarming through Shanti. She hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "Ma, why didn't you tell me earlier, this place? It's beautiful, you're beautiful." I smiled. "Because I wanted to tell you in person, and because I wanted to show you that I was okay, really okay." We spent hours walking through each room. She was full of questions, admiration, and pride. And in those hours, I felt a part of me being stitched back together. The mother in me that still needed one child to see her, to really see her. Anaya had never asked for anything. She had lived independently, respected me quietly, always calling, never assuming. When I told her about what had happened with Rahul and Ria, her jaw tightened. "I wish I'd been here." She said, "I wouldn't have let them treat you like that. You didn't have to be here." I replied, brushing her hair behind her ear like I used to when she was little. "You never forgot me, even from miles away. That was enough." She stayed for a few days, and during that time we cooked together, redecorated the guest room, and even planted jasmine together. Those small moments became the balm I didn't know I needed. They reminded me that family, when chosen with love and respect, was still possible. But then came the unexpected. One evening, just as Anaya and I were finishing dinner, the bell rang. I opened the door to find Rahul standing alone. No car, no wife, just him. He looked tired, thinner, worn down by something more than stress. "I didn't know you were still awake," he said awkwardly. "I live alone." I replied, "I don't have a curfew anymore." He smiled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Can we talk?" Anaya watched from the dining room, worried but silent. I nodded and stepped outside with him onto the porch. "I've been thinking, He began, voice low, a lot, about everything, about what I said, what I didn't say, and how I took you for granted. I remained quiet. I'm not asking to stay here. I know I haven't earned that. But I wanted to say something before I lose the chance to say it face to face. He looked at me then, not as a son expecting help or forgiveness, but as a man who had finally realized the damage his arrogance had caused. I'm sorry, Ma, for all of it, for turning you away, for forgetting who got me where I am, for making you feel like a burden when you've only ever lifted me up. I nodded slowly. That's a start. He smiled bitterly. It's going to take a while to fix what I broke, I know. Yes, I replied, but I'll know if you're trying. We stood in silence for a moment, and then he turned to leave. Rahul, I called after him. He turned, hopeful. When the baby is born, let me know. I'll send a gift. It was small, but it mattered. His eyes softened, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy who once clung to my sari in fear of school, not the man who had shut the door on me. Months had passed since that evening when Rahul appeared at my doorstep. Seasons changed, the trees in my garden bore fruit, and life continued with a sense of calm I had never known before. The house no longer felt like a monument to pain or betrayal. It had grown into a sanctuary of strength, self-worth, and rediscovered joy. Every tile, every beam, every plant in the soil whispered back to me a story of resilience. I wasn't just living in this home, I was thriving in it. Anaya returned abroad, but not before we spent several more days together, laughing, cooking, and even painting one of the balconies ourselves. She had become not just my daughter, but my closest friend. Her quiet strength and loyalty had grounded me through the turbulence. As she hugged me goodbye at the airport, she whispered, "You are the strongest woman I know, Ma." I smiled, finally believing it. Rahul, on the other hand, kept his distance, but in a different way. He didn't disappear again. Every now and then, he would send small messages, updates about Ria's pregnancy, polite inquiries about my health, even a forwarded photo of the sonogram. I responded, never cold, but never eager either. I gave him space to grow. I didn't offer shortcuts back into my life. Trust, once shattered, wasn't something I could hand back overnight, and he seemed to understand that. Then one day the doorbell rang again. This time it was a courier, an envelope with golden trim hand addressed to me. Inside was a formal birth announcement. A baby girl, healthy and beautiful, named Meenakshi. My heart softened in a way I hadn't expected. Despite everything, despite all the wounds and scars, he had named his daughter after me. Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain, but from quiet validation. He was trying, he was learning, and maybe, just maybe, he wanted his daughter to grow up differently. He wanted her to grow up knowing what strength looked like, what love without condition looked like. He wanted her to grow up knowing me. I sent them a gift the very next day, a hand-stitched baby quilt I had begun making months ago without knowing why. Along with it, a note, "Welcome to the world, Meenakshi. I hope you grow up to be everything your name stands for: grace, dignity, and quiet power. Love, Daddy." That night, I sat in my study with the window open, the moonlight falling on the pages of my journal. I didn't write about grief anymore. I didn't write about betrayal. I wrote about healing, about legacy, and about how sometimes being pushed away is exactly what you need to find your way home. The mansion wasn't just bricks and luxury. It was a symbol of what happens when a woman, dismissed and discarded, finally chooses herself. I had found freedom not in revenge, but in rebuilding. I had taught my son the most important lesson of all, not through lectures, but by becoming a mirror to his choices. And as I looked at the stars that night, planning my first solo trip to Europe, Rome, Florence, and maybe Paris, I felt no bitterness, only peace. Life had given me pain, yes, but I had returned it with grace, and in doing so, I had built something far greater than a mansion. I had built me.